All right, we're live. So welcome everybody to this remote interview. My name is Lisette and I'm interviewing people and companies doing great things remotely. And today on the line, finally, after years of waiting, I have John Odin. John, you're located in San Francisco, California, my old stomping ground, so it makes me homesick just to see it and
Yeah.
see it in the background, the sunshine there. And John, you've written code and led engineering teams in companies ranging from your website, I'm getting this, four-person
Yeah.
startups to multinational corporations, including the government. You've
Hmm.
also written a book called Distributed Teams, The Art and Practice of Working Together While Physically Apart. And you've
Hmm.
helped write the state of Vermont's remote worker law, amongst other things. And we're going to dive into all of that. But let's
Hmm.
start with the first question. What does your virtual office look like? What do you need to get your work done?
Good afternoon to you. Hello from sunny, slightly chilly San Francisco. What do I need to get my work done? Well, I've been doing like yourself when we talked about just as part of getting ready for the call here. I've been doing this for a long time, so have you. And I've learned over time how to be a minimalist. I need exactly one of these, and I sometimes carry a backup, but I don't need that. And so I've stripped down to what's the minimum microphone, camera, keyboard, foldable ergonomic keyboard. It's very carefully minimalist equipment because if I have to, I can put it all in a bag and keep traveling because I've been doing that for years. Um, so we can, if you want product brands and things like that, we can do that. But it's like one camera, one microphone, one keyboard, one little set of connecting cables for different things.
And then the main impetus for that was for travel purposes, so that you could pick up everything, or is there more about the minimalism that you like?
Well, there's a few things. One is, as an engineer, I'm always aware of when you add extra things, you increase the risk that something will break. So knowing that something is incredibly reliable is much more useful than I have three things and altogether they're very cool. It's like, no, I'm going to get rid of all three of them and get the one thing that consistently always works because I always need it to work. That's one part. And that comes from various backgrounds with live shows and things like that. The other thing is that the nature of my work, even before COVID, I mean, I've been working as part of physically distributed teams for now 28 years, and I've been leading them for 14 years. I've been doing running workshops and coaching and things like that for 7. And that means I used to spend a lot of time in the air traveling to different places to help figure out and get people transitioned over to being distributed. And then I could move on, and then I could work with people who are already in that way of working. So I had to know that I could always work anywhere. I've been doing that for a while. And I also feel like it's an important mindset that your office, your physical office, whether it's a home office or whether it's an office with a big logo on the outside of the building, that should not be a single point of failure. You should be able to get your work done, even if that burnt to the ground or the power went out because somebody put a backhoe through a trench in the wrong part of the road and knocked out the electricity. That should not disrupt your work. And so I focus on making sure I don't have single points of failure on like a wall-mounted camera system or having to go to the office to be able to do a video call, that kind of thing.
So you've been working then remotely for almost, or with distributed teams and companies for almost 28 years. So you've seen a lot of things evolve over time.
Mm-hmm.
What's one of the biggest improvements, just out of curiosity? Can you think of like one of the biggest improvements in distributed working
Sure.
since the
Yeah.
beginning?
Uh, I mean, I actually oddly did some of this in the 80s before that, but it wasn't continuous. So the last 28 years being continuous. The biggest improvement has probably been the sheer acceleration of when people started focusing on improving the video codecs in free video software. So when I started doing distributed work in different companies at first, video was a real hard problem. Like it was super expensive equipment, wall mounted into an office somewhere. It was so expensive, only the CEO or the C-level execs got to use it. Big drama events. The idea that you could have a smartphone that had a free streaming Skype on it, or, and then of course different products come out with better encoding. So, we're doing this on Zoom, which is even better. All of that being just normal. Like, people now do free streaming video calls on their smartphone, walking down the street, talking to their friends. And that ability to have that human contact where you can actually see the person nodding and blinking or smiling, grumpy eyebrows, no, I don't agree with you. The nonverbal cues are important. And it took focus to try and weed out the nonverbal cues when you couldn't see, when you're doing audio only conference calls. So I think that's probably the biggest one. It'll continue to evolve and products change, but that one item of video codecs for free, I think, is the big one.
Changes the game, no longer are we leaning over those old spider phones in the middle of the conference room table like, hey Bob, it's Lisette.
Right. Or on 30-person audio only conference calls across a couple of time zones, and someone somewhere is like tapping on a table and it sounds like a machine gun, because their fingers are right next to the microphone. All of those things. Yeah.
Well, we still have it today. So there's job security for everybody. Some of those things.
Yeah. Some people still do that. Yeah.
But okay. So I have so much to talk to you about, but the first thing that I want to ask you about is your book, Distributed Teams, the Art and Practice of Working Together While Physically Apart. Why did you write this book?
Two things I'll say quickly. One is, this is the second edition, just came out 2 months ago, which is basically a huge rewrite on the first one. I'll talk about what I did different. But the first edition came out in 2018. I started writing it in 2015. And I say that because, hey, pre-COVID. The book is basically a business management book. And I'll give you a quick crash course. It's broken up into 3 sections. One section is all about very basic tactical things: video placement, lighting, camera, sound, microphones. How do you handle email late at night, group chat? How do you handle all that group chat channels and not go crazy because you can't read them all? How do you take meeting notes in a shared meeting? That kind of stuff. All very tactical, mechanical stuff, with explicit takeaways at the top of each chapter. Try this. If that doesn't work, see if you can find something better, but here's some things that have worked and why. The next third is higher level human stuff. How do you interview, hire, onboard, maintain team culture, deal with burnout, deal with conflict when conflict avoidance is easy, just deal with promotions and firings and hirings and all of that kind of human stuff. Right, that's the next big section. And the third section was the kind of meta stuff around that. So when I was writing this, every time I talk about working in distributed teams, people at some point will all get excited and say, well, it doesn't solve this, or what about that? And you end up having these weird opinion arguments back and forth around, are distributed teams more racially diverse or more gender diverse? What about age diversity? What about disaster resilience? If you have an office and you depend on the office, how do you deal with that? So I took all of these things around how to deal with offices, the real costs of offices, hiring diversely, dealing with the environmental impact of commuting, dealing with economic development impact of hiring in distributed teams, all of that, and made that the third part of the book. And so that's the book. It's technically a business management book. I have a ton of half-read business management books, so I made sure to make it easy to read. So there's no management words. It's all small English words. They're all short chapters, 8 to 10 pages. They all have takeaways. So you could just skip the chapter and read the takeaways if you wanted to.
So easily digestible, but sounds very comprehensive and complete. Actually.
Yeah, it's the book I wish I had when I'd started. And actually, sorry to interrupt, but the other part of your question was, why did I write it? And I wrote it because I realized I was working in a company once years ago, And at some point, there was this big heated argument between me and a peer of mine who was an engineering manager for another team in the same company. We're both engineering managers of different sized teams. Both teams were physically distributed. And this other engineering manager, there'd been a big communication snafu, and it was all upsetting to people. And he, in the corridor outside, was very, very upset with me. And he's like, it's not fair. My team's all scattered all over the place. Your team is all here in headquarters. That's why you all know what's going on and we don't. And that made me kind of stop, because I was like, wait a minute, why is he all upset at me? And then secondly, wait, that's actually not true. Like, I happen to know his team is physically distributed, but it looks like he doesn't know mine is. And said, wait a second. I said, hold on a second. I know your team's distributed, but so is mine. And I started listing off the names and the cities of all the people from my team. And I said, and no one in my team is in headquarters. And then he stopped me. He's like, oh, wait a minute. And he didn't know that. So it was a few minutes to chatter on that. And then it's like, well, then in that case, how come you all know what's going on and we don't? And I had the engineer brain, John, kicks in. It's like, we're using about the same tools. It's about the same size teams. We're in the same company, working on different parts of the same product. The difference was how each of us were leading the teams. And so I started writing down and like putting engineer brain into, why do we have that communication? Why do we have a status meeting for this? Why are we sending 2 emails on this topic, not 1? Or why is there actually now 17 emails on this topic, not 1 or 2? Like, what's going on? And that's what I started writing down. That became the beginning of a series of workshops I started giving and brown bags. That turned into eventually people saying, hey, can I have those slides? Can I print out copies of those slides? Can I turn that? So I then turned into more and more, and then I started writing it. It became a book.
Amazing, amazing. So you've hit on a couple of things that I think are really good for this moment. And that is, you talked about group chat and how to manage group chat. And well, I want to dive into that a little bit, because one of the things that's happening right now is there are so many messages flying back and forth that people are getting completely exhausted. So when I hear you say things like, okay, we need to learn how to manage group chat, why are there 2 emails instead of 1? I start to think about, how can people better manage this endless stream of stuff going back and forth? I don't know if you've read Cal Newport's new book. He calls it the hyperactive hive mind. His new, it's called A World Without Email. And so, but it's all this ping-ponging back and forth, and people are exhausted by it, and it's not a great way to work. So I just want to dive into this a little bit. What are your thoughts on managing group chat?
Sure. A couple of things. One is Slack is a new product, but group chat has been around in various different product forms for a long time. A long time. And some of them still use the same network protocols underneath the covers. But it's been around for a long time. So it's worth actually looking at what etiquette has been created by other communities over the previous decades for this kind of stuff. So there's a human etiquette, like, how do you come to an agreement on something? There's a whole bunch of different forums have figured this out over the years, and they have even written books on it or posted things on the internet on this. So you can go and research these and see which apply for your organization. That's one. 2, the other thing is that, just to pick on Slack and Microsoft Teams are the 2 big popular ones these days. In all of these, you can create channels, or chat rooms they used to call them, but you can create a group environment or a channel, and you can talk about things there. But what ends up happening is people have so many channels, they don't know where to go. So they end up posting stuff about topic 1 into a channel about topic 2. Because they tried finding the right channel, they couldn't find which is the right channel for this, so they just mention it wherever. That causes you to now have a situation where everyone has to read every channel to keep up with what's going on. And it's like, if you want to take an office analogy, it's like trying to be, it's nice that people can have the equivalent of a casual corridor conversation in a chat channel, but you can't be in every corridor conversation all day on every floor of a building. You'll go mad, and you certainly won't be able to do your own day job. And so what you need is, the mindset I push on is a couple of things. One is, all chat is transient. If something important comes up in chat, Like if something important comes up in a corridor conversation, then go put it in a single source of truth. Where's the place of record? And you don't have to write a thesis. You can just copy paste that piece of text, stick it in there and say, per quick conversation with Lizette, we now think it's going to be Friday, not Monday. Now
Right.
everybody knows. So it means that nobody is obligated to try and wake up in the morning and read all of the different chat channels that have been going on for the last 48 hours over the weekend or whatever. I think that's one important thing. Two is moderating. Every company I've gone in to work with, they usually have, when I start off, it's like, okay, how many chat channels they have? Oh, we have a lot. How many? And I have a private running bet which says you probably have about 2.5 chat channels per human. And I'm pretty close to consistent on that. Sometimes it's
Wow.
2.75. And they're always shocked. Like if you have a 100-person company, that means 250 chat channels. It's no wonder people can't find what the right chat channel is. So the
Right.
act of aggressively shutting down channels and the act of having people, if there's a channel, it's not being used, close it. People can always create a new one. If there's a channel and someone's saying things about topic 1 in channel number 2, tell them to go to the other place, because that'll help. So that channel moderating, so that's all part of it. And that's not technology, that's human stuff.
Right. Who on the team usually does this kind of thing?
That you have to actually distribute out, right? It's unfair to have one person try to be a full-time moderator of all 200 whatever channels you have, or if you're a bigger company, it's into thousands. So usually I recommend having whoever's, if this is a channel, it's a particular project. Yeah, Lizette is running the project on blah, blah, blah. Lizette, it's your channel.
Right.
But if people totally mess up and nobody uses the channel appropriately, it's all transient anyway.
Right.
So you
Right.
could ignore it if you want.
So that's great advice. So I really like this single source of truth. So the channels are chatter. When something happens, a decision gets made, something important, we take that from the chatter and we put it into the single source of truth. So that, and I think there's a lot of companies that don't have a single source of truth like that set
Mhm.
up at the moment. And that's sort of one of the newer ways of working, right? That's part of this new medium of work, is having sort of an information architecture set up so that there is a place where people can dip into and take out of as needed, instead of relying on word of mouth or the back and forth ping ponging of messages all the time.
Right.
So I think
You will find organizations have, they'll have like project managing, project tracking systems. There's a bunch of different systems out there. But if you find that you have a project tracking system and then you also have an email and the project tracking system says, oh, we'll be done with this thing on Monday. And then you get an email from someone who's running the project and they say, oh, it'll be done on Tuesday. And you got a text message from someone who's a lead engineer on the project who says, I don't think it's going to happen for the next 2 weeks. Well, that's actually, you don't have a single source of truth. You might have a ton of software lying around the place that you paid for, but your humans are not organized around what actually is truthful and what would you make a binding decision on. Like, would you press go on a press release or ad campaign into major news media based on that level of uncertainty? For most people, the answer is no, which means that they want to have real certainty. So what they do is they call a status meeting.
Right.
Suddenly, everyone's in status meetings. Suddenly, everyone has Zoom fatigue. It's 100% predictable. If you spend 10 hours a day on a video call, congratulations, you got Zoom fatigue. If other products were as easy to use as Zoom, you'd have WebEx fatigue and Microsoft Teams fatigue and things like that. But it's about being on video all the time because humans have not organized how they communicate. Where's that single source of truth? How confident are you that you would make an important binding decision based on that? And if you're not confident, that's a management problem. That's not a technology problem.
Absolutely. Yeah, the technology just reflects back what we're putting into it. So
yeah, it's a tool.
so if we put chaos in, chaos out. Yeah, indeed, it's a tool. So now you said that one of the chapters in your book is called
Mm.
Feed Your Soul.
Oh
And so
yeah.
this kind of goes right into, because we're getting so fatigued and people are really burning out because we've taken what we did in the office and we've translated it directly online, and it doesn't translate well. It translates right into burnout, actually. And so I'm
Mhm.
wondering, what advice do you give people in your book about feeding their souls?
Um, a couple of things, and see if I can answer all of this in one go. I think the first one is just be kind to yourself. Um, Working from home, even for people who are accustomed to working from home for a long time, like myself, yourself, and other people I've met who've been working from home routinely long before COVID. Working from home during a global pandemic with a lot of political turmoil, a lot of racial turmoil, a lot of economic upset, all of which is being caused in interacting with each other, and active health concerns around pandemics. That's scary, turbulent times. Or if this is your first exposure to working from home, during that, it's easy to think that, oh, working from home always means you have a pandemic and you have like school closures and you're learning how to do this at home with your kids, and your partner lost their job, or maybe your mother or your child has got sick with the disease, like, all these big, serious dramas that actually have nothing to do with where do you sit down when you go to do your work. So working from home is not the same as working from home during a global pandemic and all the other things. So just being aware and being nice to yourself about the fact that there's a lot of big, stressful, scary things going on for a lot of people. And so remembering that we're humans and remembering that, we're all just a little wigged out and scared right now because there's a lot of really big, scary things that are correct to be wigged out and scared about.
Yeah.
So kind of, if this is your first exposure to working from home, keep that in mind. Two is for people who've never worked from home before, people who have worked from home for a long time, have a pattern they've already built or evolved for themselves for their own schedule. And in my case, now, of course, I'd done that too. I had like fake commutes to walk to coffee shops in the morning. I have a coffee machine at home. I could just make my own coffee, but I'd walk down to the coffee shop, make my to-do list for the day. I got some exercise, some fresh air. I get to chit chat with the person who's making the espresso. Same in the evening. That changed when COVID closed down all the coffee shops, right? So also suddenly walking around the streets with masks on and everyone all being, socially distant was a big scary event as well. So how do you recreate that in a different way? You need that's people who have been doing this for a while, people who always used to work in an office and had their commute imposed on them by their employer, often don't know that you need a commute.
Right.
So
It's
they just
just the
get out of
thing you
bed.
did.
Right, you just did that. So they get out of bed, and while they're making their first cup of tea or coffee, they start looking at email and they start looking at the news, and suddenly it's 11 o'clock in the morning. They haven't even put on, the right pants or whatever. So that and next thing you know, it's 11 o'clock at night and you're still doing the same thing. You fall into bed, you get up and you do it again. And yes, productivity has gone up in the kind of technical, precise definition. It's because people are working all the time. People are running faster and faster because of this anxiety about all of this. I must work really hard because I don't want to lose my job because of the global and economic and pandemic and all the other stuff.
Yeah.
So creating a structure where you say, I leave the house in the morning, I take a 20-minute walk. I don't actually, sometimes I create an artificial reason to go mail one letter. And I walk by all these letter boxes to get to the post office just because I want to have a 20-minute walk is actually the objective. There was an article here nearby me, she used to drive 30 minutes to work. So she started leaving her house and driving 15 minutes away, turning around and driving 15 minutes home. That worked for her. She had a 30-minute commute because that's when she did her thinking. And the important part is for you to realize you need this at the beginning of your day and at the end of your day, and create what works for you. And I'll say one last thing here, which is different humans have different lives. So for people with kids, typically late afternoon through to kid bedtime, depending on age of kids and number of kids and a bunch of criteria. Usually it's quite a chaotic household. There's kids running around all full of energy. There's people needing to be fed, bathed, put into bed, story time, all that kind of stuff. If you're single or you have no kids, and it might be easy to say, okay, fine, I'll stop work at 5 or 6 o'clock at night. However, therefore, to help everyone have a work-life separation, I will enforce that we will stop work at 6 o'clock at night. We'll shut down all systems at 6 o'clock. We'll prevent email at 6 o'clock, whatever. One, that actually adds stress to the people who are dealing with children late afternoon. It's easier for them to focus on the kids, and then after the kids go to bed, then they'll do that last couple of hours of work after dinner when the kids are in bed. So if you force that work to happen before 6, now you're actually making their life worse, not better.
Right.
Is item one. Item two, any of these big corporate announcements I've ever seen in the past sound fine for a while. And then at some point, a real emergency comes up after 6 o'clock and everyone can't get it to respond to it because the systems were turned off because of that great keep you from going crazy, turn off the systems at 6 o'clock. And so then everyone's like, oh, forget it. We need to have access to our systems after 6. And so they turn it back on again. So encouraging the humans to know what to do to save their own souls, feed their own souls, is much better than trying to come up with a organizational mandate on technology.
Oh, yeah. And also, people are experts of their own lives and their own productivity habits. So let them sort it out. Don't, like, if the company tries to put some sort of a blanket rule, that's not going to, that might work for a couple people, but for the majority, we
probably
all have,
won't work. Right.
Yeah, we all have our own weird things that we're doing, whether it's kids or books or triathlons or whatever it is.
Or whatever is your,
whatever it is, like, let us be experts of our own lives kind of things. However, I think that's what also makes it so difficult, is then we have to be experts of our own lives. And I think putting those boundaries in place for ourselves, I mean, anybody that's tried losing weight knows it's a lot more than just eating less and moving more, right? It's
there's a whole, there's a stress, but it's that there's an awareness, and just to that, exactly on that thing, there's an awareness that you need to do something. And then there's a self-motivation and the mental rigor that goes with that actually helps you do it, which is why some people can lose weight and then put weight back on. And some people don't know how to structure the day, so they rely on having a particular structure of the day imposed on them by their employer when they go to an office, and then a totally different structure of the day imposed on them when they change jobs and go to a different employer with a different office and a different commute pattern. And suddenly they can't go do their sports thing at the gym on Tuesday because their commute's a mess. So they do it on Thursdays now or whatever.
Right.
And they don't think about it. And it has actually something that each human needs to do and be aware of. And so that's part of the feed your soul piece, is be aware you need to do it, and then figure, here's some options that might work for you. But what works for you is your question to be answered by yourself.
Right. Because for me, driving 30 minutes sounds like a nightmare, like driving 30 minutes every morning. I hate cars. I hate driving, like really hate with a passion. That sounds like a nightmare to me. Like doing an actual commute for no reason, wouldn't do it. So, but it works for her. So, and great, whatever works. I think really whatever works in these situations. Yeah. So I realize we're starting to get close to the time. I can't believe it. I still have so many questions. We have got to talk about distributed economic development before we get off this call, though, because I think that's an area that we don't talk about much on this podcast. I have very little expertise in that. And you have a lot of expertise in this. So I would love to dive into the idea, what is distributed economic development? And then we'll dive into why do we need to know about this?
Sure.
So what is it first?
Okay, well, it's the first. So as a computer guy, I should note I am not a policy expert, although I've helped with a few of them now. But let me give a quick crash course on policy for a second. So economic development is where a particular jurisdiction, say like a city or a state, or that could be like a state or a province within a country or an actual country. So a jurisdiction can say, hey, we we want to have an employer come in here and bring jobs. So I'm specifically trying to not mention companies and not mention countries. So I'm trying to like be super generic intentionally. So a particular jurisdiction will say, hey, we want to have more jobs here. So we're going to give a bunch of money to a company. We're going to have the company move operations over to us, to our location, and they're going to hire all the people who live here. So all the people who live here will now get jobs. The company now based in our jurisdiction will pay taxes. So we'll get some of the money we gave, we'll get that money back over time. The company will pay the humans who live in our jurisdiction. So those humans then pay taxes. So we get back the money we gave. So this is actually a good and valid, in my opinion, a good and valid use of a tax base of money, like a pooled amount of shared money that is owned, that the jurisdiction has to try and make things better for the humans. And it's basically a kind of a weird loan. You give out the money, the company moves, you get back some of it, and you get back some of it from the humans. That's traditional economic development. That's been going on for well over 100 years in different forms in different countries. And there's little details about exactly how much money and what's a tax write-off and what isn't, and all, but that's roughly it. A few things have importantly changed here. There's no such thing as a job for life. That's kind of gone away sometime in the last 25, 30 years. So that means now when a company moves to your jurisdiction, you say, hey, we want jobs, you bring the company comes. The company knows that they're only going to be able to hire people for a short amount of time before they leave. So they want to only base themselves in a place where there's a lot of people. In the US, the average is now 4 years tenure average across all industries. In Silicon Valley, it's under 2 years.
Wow.
So if you're going somewhere, and that under 2 years is, by the way, for all the big name companies that can spend a lot of money to keep people. You know, for other companies, it's a lot shorter. So that means if your company's moving somewhere, they don't want to spend 2 years training, hiring someone as an intern who then goes up through the ranks and will retire in 25 years as the VP or whatever. That's not going to happen. They're going to only hire people who already have the skills they need for the job. Which means if they move to a particular location, they can hire people who can be quickly trained. So you get a lot of hourly work for like distribution centers and things that are very easy to quickly train people on, knowing there's going to be a super high attrition turnover, incredibly high attrition and turnover rate. And it's a big city, so you can kind of basically hire and fire your way through thousands of people. If it's any kind of hard knowledge worker projects that are complicated, high value, a lot of money, they don't want to hire people and then have to train them how to do like AWS machine learning APIs. No, like either you have those skills or you don't.
Mm-hmm.
Bringing a big company to a town and then looking around to say, how many previously trained and now currently unemployed AWS machine learning API experts are there? Probably zero. Which means what you have to do then is find people from somewhere else and bring them. So you then start creating this gentrification displacement problem, because those new people who are being brought in by the new employer want to live near the shiny new office that was just built. And so that turns into the people who used to live there get displaced and priced out and pushed away. And you can see that pattern happening in a bunch of different cities around the world, where you have fancy employer offices, highly paid employees right nearby, and then all the people who used to live there but who make the city work and have multi-generational history there.
Mm-hmm.
The cops, firefighters, school teachers, you know, they're all priced out further and further away. So what ends up happening is you get schools with like fewer teachers. So you get student-teacher ratios go sideways. You get not enough cops, not enough firefighters, massive commute and traffic problems, complaints about housing and affordability of housing, and all of these things happening in not just the US, but every major metro area you can think of.
Yeah.
That's because of the requirement for people to live near the office and commute to the office. If you break that assumption about living within commute range of an office, you can do it totally differently. So instead of giving incentive, go back to the beginning. Now, what's distributed economic development? Instead of giving incentives to a corporation to come and bring jobs, what if you say, I'll give incentives to humans who live somewhere else who already have a job, who they can bring their job with them and become a new tax-paying resident in my jurisdiction.
That just changes the nature of the whole game.
It's a total game changer. It has a couple of advantages. One, it's very fast. These traditional models can take years to convince a company to move because you're talking now millions and billions, lots of zeros in there. And incentives for individuals can be very fast. People can move within a couple of weeks. In the case of Vermont, most people had moved within 4 months.
Wow.
Moved and being paid within 4 months. The other thing is that they don't cluster because they're all working online. They don't all need to be near a particular building, which means they all move to different parts of the jurisdiction. So you get a gentle increase in the economic welfare of the entire jurisdiction, not just clustered around a particular dot on the map that you happen to have built an office at. So you don't get that gentrification, displacement, and traffic and commute patterns problem.
So being
And
that
the
you're
last
in
thing.
San Francisco, oh, sorry.
The last, yeah, no, it's good. The last one is you don't have all eggs in one basket. Like if your one employer is a big employer in town and 80% of your town works for that one employer, now what if that employer goes away? Whereas if you have people in your jurisdiction and they work for a whole bunch of different companies, of course, every now and then someone's going to lose a job, but not all 80% of your jurisdiction at the one time.
Right, not the entire city or 80% of the entire city, which I
Right,
can
and if
imagine.
80% of the city loses their money or loses their job, the other 20% lose their customers. So that the local hairdresser, the local bartender, they all close down because they've lost all their clients.
Right.
So this has happened. Well, there's many examples of that too.
So knowing that you're in San Francisco, though, have you personally seen the exodus of people leaving the Bay Area? Because we know now, Twitter is going remote. Facebook is starting to think about going remote. I'm not sure about Apple, given that they've just finished their giant campus there, right? But have you personally noticed an exodus out of the city or the area?
There's a few things. There are definitely some people who've left. Is one. There's a few different. Just in the last 12 months, things have changed in a few different ways. One is some people have definitely left. Interesting to see there's now other people starting to move back to San Francisco because the prices of rent has come down enough that they could actually reasonably consider it. They'd been priced out of town and they were living elsewhere, but it's their hometown where they grew up and they wanted to move back. So you see people moving back as well. Is one aspect. There's a lot of chatter about people saying, oh, well, that's it, I'm leaving from San Francisco. I'm going to go move to Austin is a popular one right now, but there's a few other towns. Often what's tied in there is keep in mind that other towns also have this gentrification, displacement, traffic problem. But sometimes people moving like that are moving because they're moving to states that don't have tax, personal state tax, which means it's a good place to go if you want to sell your stock options. Become a resident there, sell your stock options without paying state tax, and then move. So there's motivators. The last thing I'll say about the city is that San Francisco is only 7-ish miles by 7-ish miles approximately. And there was a lot of economic focus on the downtown area, down near Embarcadero. That area had like a lot of office buildings being built, all in the last maybe 20 years. They were not there before. And that was the hub of all the offices, the big Salesforce building, a bunch of Google offices, Facebook, Twitter, etc. In San Francisco City, if you go to these other neighborhoods, what made San Francisco very special, in my opinion, was that it had lots of very uniquely different neighborhoods. So you could go to Twin Peaks or West Portal or Sunset or Richmond or Noe Valley or Castro or Mission. Right, you're nodding and you're like, oh yeah, I know these neighborhoods, right?
I'm very homesick. Just
Sorry. But they all have very different vibes to them, very, very different vibes to them. And all of them before COVID, what would happen was people get up in the morning and leave to go to work somewhere else. And you walk up and down any of these neighborhood streets in the middle of the week, say as someone who worked from home all the time and could go do that, all these neighborhoods are empty. The stores are closed. Maybe they're stocking up for the weekend, but there's no activity. There's no commercial activity in these neighborhoods because everyone's going to the one downtown hot neighborhood where the offices are. Since COVID hits, the offices areas really gone down in activity. Like there's shuttered windows and very, very little foot traffic. But all these other neighborhoods have really picked up on traffic. There's now a bustle of activity during the week in all these other neighborhoods. The people who used to leave and their neighborhood and go somewhere else to work are now working from home and then going to their neighborhood coffee shop or the neighborhood sandwich shop. So it's actually turning up the economy there. So there is it does get a lot of clickbait on the headlines to say, oh, everyone's leaving, we're all moving, you know, that whole speech is going on. It's not, it's a lot more subtle and nuanced than that.
And it sounds like it's kind of happening everywhere. Like things are sort of not flattening, but I kind of, the imagery that's coming into my head is like things are flattening out everywhere, distributing out everywhere, should I say.
I was about to say, yeah.
That's
Yeah.
what was that word I was looking for?
What was that word you're
Distribute.
looking
Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's distributing out a little bit more evenly, which I can imagine. Yeah, it's going to be an interesting change
Mhm.
in terms of economics and neighborhood life and what that does to our cities. We're going to have to explore that on another podcast because we're reaching time and I want to be respectful of your time. But John, I'm certainly going to have you back. I've got two last questions for you.
Sure.
One is, given your experience with leadership with distributed teams, what's one advice that you can give to leaders right now that maybe are new to distributed leadership? What's one thing that you think that leaders need to know?
One thing.
I mean, I know there's a lot.
Yeah,
They've
there
got to
is.
get your book, so they can start
Yeah.
there.
Start there. I trust and culture and humans is probably the most important thing. You can buy shiny technology toys, and that's, you know, I gave a long speech about that at the beginning, get the minimalist set and make sure it works. But the tools have to work, right? That's a basic. But the hard part is how humans communicate and talk and coordinate with each other. A company is basically a collection of humans working together on the same problem, on the same thing. And you have that problem in an office. If you're used to an office, you have that problem if you're not in an office. And I think it's really important that your office should not be a single point of failure. So you as a human should, if you're leading and managing people, you need to focus on trust. You need to focus on culture and being able to answer the question of what are people working on and how do I know what people are working on and how will I know what's the update? What's that single source of truth thing? Right. And if your only way of knowing that is walking up and down the corridor to see if someone's sitting at a chair or walking over to ask someone or calling someone every 30 minutes to ask them for an update, then you have a management communication problem. That's not a technology problem. There are companies that are large companies that have been doing this for decades. It's not rocket science. It is, however, requiring careful human leadership. That's the one thing that people need to do. And you should do it in an office, by the way, anyway, but that's a whole other speech.
Right. Well, it goes for in-person leaders as well, but remote,
Right.
it becomes a critical component of the way that you lead your teams. I love it. Trust, culture, and humans. And then having
Yeah.
that single source of truth. I'm going to add that into the show notes. I think that's just critically important. All right, last question is an easy one. If people want to learn more about what you do and the book that you've written, where's the best place to find you online?
LinkedIn is one place. I did actually set up a website for the book, so distributedteamsbook.com. You can get links to buy it. I do some consulting work as well. I also do, for some companies and organizations, I do a thing where we end up doing bulk buys depending on what's going on. So you can coordinate all that through the website. So distributedteamsbook.com. And LinkedIn. I'm also on Twitter, so that's first initial last name, JODUINN.
Love it. And we'll also put all these links in the show notes to make it easily accessible for people. Yeah, so that's easily accessible for people, period.
Full stop. Yeah.
Full stop. John, thank you so much for your time today. I took copious notes and I look forward to distilling them into the show notes. No, really awesome information. And clearly there needs to be a part 2. So stay tuned, everybody.
I'd be delighted. This is a real pleasure, Lizette. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you. All right, everybody, until next time, be powerful.